Amara Collins measured her survival in tips and textbooks. It was 1:45 a.m., and Joanna's diner was a neon-lit cage of exhaustion. Her feet throbbed against the sticky linoleum as she wiped down booth 4, her mind drifting to unpaid tuition and the anatomy exam she wasn't ready for. Then, she saw it. Wedged into the cracked red vinyl was a wallet. Not the Velcro kind usually left behind, but sleek, heavy cordovan leather. Inside, there were no receipts. Only thick stacks of $100 bills and an ID, Kang Dae-hyun. The photo revealed a man with a sharp jaw, slicked back hair, and bold black tattoos climbing his neck. He had sat there for an hour, silent, staring at her with eyes that seemed to dissect her soul. Amara stood frozen under the warm restaurant lights, clutching the wallet with both hands as if she were being judged. The money could save her. It could end the double shifts. But a cold dread coiled in her stomach. This didn't feel like a lost item. It felt like bait. She didn't know it yet, but she wasn't just holding a wallet, she was holding a life-or-death test, and the man with the tattoos was waiting to see if she would pass. Before we dive into this story, tell me where in the world you're watching from. I want to know how far this lovely story traveled. Drop your country in the comments, hit that subscribe button. I read every single one comment here, so please drop your comments now. Let's begin. Amara stood there, the leather warm against her palm, the diner silence pressing in on her eardrums. She opened the wallet again, just a fraction, as if the money inside might burn her if she looked too long. The bills were crisp, blue-faced hundreds, packed so tight they didn't even rustle. She did the math instantly. A reflex honed by years of poverty. $4,000. Maybe 5. In her head, the crushing weight of her life unspooled. That stack of paper was 3 months of rent. It was the overdue tuition for her pharmacology module. It was a new pair of shoes to replace the ones currently chewing up her heels. It was freedom. For a few seconds, the air in the diner tasted different, lighter, cleaner. She imagined slipping the wallet into her apron pocket. She could say she found nothing. Who would know? The security cameras were dummies. Lenny, her cheapskate manager, had never bothered to wire them. She could walk out the door, disappear into the night, and breathe for the first time in years. Her hand trembled, a violent tremor that started in her fingers and rattled her teeth. The temptation was a physical ache, a hunger deep in her gut. Take it, the voice in her head whispered, sounding dangerously like common sense. The world takes from you every day. Take something back. She stared at the cash, mesmerized. But then her gaze drifted to the left, to the laminated card tucked next to the bills. The ID. Kang Dae-hyun. Even in the flat, lifeless plastic of a license photo, his energy was radioactive. The ink on his neck, a dark, jagged script she couldn't read, seemed to pulse under the fluorescent lights. She remembered how he had sat in booth 4. He hadn't looked at his phone. He hadn't slouched. He had sat with the stillness of a predator waiting for movement in the grass. He had looked at her, really looked at her, when she poured his water. His eyes hadn't been undressing her, they had been weighing her, calculating her value like an actuary of souls. A cold sweat broke across the back of her neck. This wasn't drug money or a rich kid's allowance. This was blood money. Amara closed her eyes and saw her grandmother's hands, rough, calloused, worn down by decades of scrubbing floors. Wagging a finger in her face. You starve before you steal, Amara. A hungry belly is quiet, but a guilty spirit screams forever. The memory hit her like a physical blow. Her grandmother had died with nothing in her bank account, but she had died with her head high. Amara gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles turning white. If she took this money, she wouldn't just be stealing from a gangster, she would be erasing the one thing she actually owned, her name. Her integrity. It was the only asset she had that didn't have a price tag. She looked back at the wallet. It no longer looked like salvation. It looked like a trap. The silence of the diner was suddenly broken by the hum of the refrigerator compressor kicking on, loud and jarring. Amara gasped, snapping the wallet shut. The sound was like a gunshot in the empty room. The temptation evaporated, replaced by a nauseating clarity. She wasn't keeping this. She couldn't. But she couldn't leave it here, either. If Lenny found it, he'd pocket the cash and toss the ID, and when the man with the tattoos came back looking for it, and he would come back, he wouldn't care about Lenny. He would find the waitress who cleaned his table. Panic, sharp and icy, spiked in her chest. She had to get rid of it. She had to return it, and she had to do it now, before the temptation returned, or worse, before the owner did. Amara took a shaky breath, smoothing her apron with a hand that still wouldn't stop quaking. She walked behind the counter, the wallet feeling heavy as a brick in her grip, and reached for the greasy landline phone. She wasn't calling for a reward. She was calling to save her life. Amara's fingers felt clumsy as she punched the 10 digits into the diner's landline. The keypad was sticky with grease, a tactile reminder of the grime she was trying to escape, but the card in her other hand was pristine. Stark white. No logo. Just a name, Kang Dae-hyun, and the number. She held her breath as the line rang. Once. Twice. She expected a voicemail. Maybe a distracted assistant. At best, a relieved wealthy man grateful that his night wouldn't be ruined by cancelled credit cards. She had already rehearsed her line, "Hi, this is Amara from Joanna's Diner. I found your wallet safely in the booth." She imagined the relief in his voice, a polite thank you, maybe a promise to swing by in the morning. The line clicked open on the third ring. Speak. The word wasn't a greeting, it was a command. The voice was deep, baritone, and stripped of any warmth. It vibrated against her ear, startling her into silence. Hello? Amara stammered, her rehearsal evaporating instantly. My name is Amara. I'm a server at Joanna's Diner. Silence stretched on the other end, not the empty silence of a bad connection, but the heavy, breathing silence of someone listening, assessing. It felt less like a phone call and more like she had just stepped into a dark room where someone was watching her. I'm calling because I found a wallet, she continued, her voice rising in pitch as her nerves frayed. It belongs to a Mr. Kong. I found it in booth 4. I just wanted to let you know it's safe and you have my property. The voice cut through her babble like a scalpel. It was him. Kang Dae-hyun. The accent was faint but precise, every syllable enunciated with terrifying clarity. He didn't sound relieved. He sounded like a judge confirming a verdict. Yes, sir, Amara said, gripping the phone cord. I have it right here. The shift is over, and we're locking up, so I didn't know if I should leave it with my manager or... You will give it to no one. The tone dropped an octave, becoming dangerously quiet. The hair on Amara's arms stood up. This wasn't how people talked about lost leather goods. This was how people talked about evidence. Okay, she whispered. Listen to me very carefully, Miss Collins, Kong said. He knew her last name. She hadn't given it. The realization hit her chest like a cold fist. You will remain exactly where you are. You will not lock the doors. You will not speak to your manager. You will stand by the front counter and wait. Amara looked around the empty diner. The hum of the refrigerator seemed to grow louder, more oppressive. Sir, I really need to go home. I have an exam in the morning. I can just... Do not leave that building. The command was absolute. A black SUV will arrive in 12 minutes. You will hand the wallet to the driver. You will not engage him in conversation. You will not ask for a reward. You will hand over the item and you will step back. Do you understand? Amara's heart was hammering against her ribs, a frantic rhythm that made her lightheaded. She felt tears pricking the corners of her eyes, not from sadness, but from a sudden, sharp fear. She had expected gratitude. Instead, she was receiving orders. I understand, she managed to choke out. Good, Kong said. The pause that followed was agonizing. 12 minutes, Amara. Do not test my patience. The line went dead with a sharp click. Amara slowly lowered the phone back to the cradle, her hand trembling so hard she missed the hook on the first try. The dial tone whined into the empty room, a lonely, mechanical sound. She looked at the clock on the wall. 1:58 a.m. She wasn't a good Samaritan anymore. She was a captive. She walked to the front counter, clutching the wallet to her chest, and stared out into the dark, empty street, waiting for the headlights that would decide her fate. The 12 minutes stretched into a silent, suffocating eternity. Amara stood behind the counter, her eyes locked on the dark asphalt of the empty street. The diner's refrigerator hummed its monotonous tune, a sound that usually blended into the background but now felt like a countdown ticking inside her skull. Every shadow that stretched across the parking lot looked like a threat, every rattle of the old ventilation system sounded like a footstep. At exactly 2:10 a.m. The darkness outside was sliced open by beams of halogen white. A vehicle turned into the lot, moving with a terrifying, shark-like silence. It wasn't a police car, and it certainly wasn't a taxi. It was a black sedan, sleek and low to the ground, with tinted windows so dark they looked like voids cut into the night. It didn't park in a spot. It idled right at the curb, directly in front of the glass doors, the engine purring with a deep, suppressed rumble that vibrated against the diner's window pane. Amara's breath trapped in her throat. She gripped the wallet so tight her fingers ached. The rear passenger door didn't open. Instead, the driver's door unlatched with a heavy, mechanical thunk. A man stepped out. He wasn't Kang Dae-hyun. He was older, broader, built like a slab of granite forced into a charcoal suit. He didn't look at the diner, he scanned the perimeter of the parking lot first, a practiced, tactical sweep that made Amara realize with chilling clarity that this wasn't a transaction, it was an extraction. Satisfied, he turned toward the glass doors and walked in. The overhead bell chimed, a cheerful ding-ding that sounded grotesque in the heavy atmosphere. The man walked straight to the counter. He brought a gust of cold night air and the scent of expensive, sterile leather with him. He stopped 2 feet from her, towering over the counter, his face a mask of stone. He didn't say hello. He didn't ask her name. He simply held out a large, gloved hand, palm open. Amara's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She lifted the Cordovan wallet. She didn't just hand it over, she extended it with both hands, her palms flat and trembling, an instinctive gesture of total submission and transparency. It was an offering. See? I didn't take anything. I am honest. Please don't hurt me. The contents, she whispered, her voice cracking. I didn't open it. I swear. The man took the wallet. The leather left her skin, and she felt a sudden, phantom coldness where it had been. He didn't respond to her plea. Instead, he pressed a small latch on the side of the wallet. It snapped open. He didn't count the money, he didn't even look at the cash. His eyes flicked to a small, almost invisible thread of silk tucked into the inner fold, checking if it had been broken. He looked up, his gaze locking onto hers. Under the warm, buzzing restaurant lights, Amara felt stripped bare. She wasn't just being looked at, she was being judged. He was weighing her fear against her honesty, measuring her poverty against her integrity. It was a scrutiny so intense she felt the urge to apologize for things she hadn't even done. The man snapped the wallet shut. Confirmed, he rumbled. His voice was gravel grinding on concrete. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. Amara flinched, instinctively taking a half-step back, her mind flashing to guns, to silencers, to headlines about missing students. But he didn't pull out a weapon. He produced a thick, cream-colored envelope. He placed it on the counter between them. It landed with a heavy, dull thud. Mr. Kong values discretion, the man said. It was a statement, not a conversation. This concludes the matter. He turned on his heel with military precision and walked out. The bell chimed again, mocking her. The sedan's door slammed shut, and the car peeled away into the night, dissolving into the shadows as quickly as it had appeared. Amara was left alone in the neon silence, her chest heaving, staring at the envelope that lay on the counter like a verdict she was afraid to read. The red taillights of the sedan dissolved into the darkness, leaving Amara alone in the crushing silence of the diner. The only sound was the refrigerator's hum and the frantic thudding of her own heart. On the counter, the cream-colored envelope sat like a heavy, unexploded ordnance. It looked out of place against the grease-stained laminate, thick, textured paper that whispered of old money and high-rise offices. Amara stared at it for a long minute, her hands hovering, terrified to touch it yet unable to look away. The associate hadn't given her a receipt. He hadn't asked for a signature. He had just left this. Slowly, she reached out. The envelope was shockingly heavy. With trembling fingers, she slid a nail under the wax-sealed flap and tore it open. She didn't look inside immediately, she appended it over the counter. A brick of currency slid out with a dull, solid slap. Amara gasped, the sound sucking the air out of the room. It wasn't just a few $100s. It was a stack of crisp, sequential $100 bills, bound in a paper band, thick enough to choke on. She stared, her mind struggling to comprehend the geometry of the stack. 10,000? 20? It was more money than she made in a year of scrubbing tables and double shifts. It was her entire nursing degree. It was rent for the next 3 years. It was a new car. It was freedom, condensed into a block of green paper. Her knees gave out. She sank onto the stool behind the register, her breath coming in short, shallow bursts. She reached out to touch the money, half expecting it to dissolve like smoke. It was real. Cold, crisp, and terrifyingly real. Then she saw the card. It had fallen out last, fluttering onto the stack of cash. It was the same heavy, expensive stock as the envelope. Amara picked it up, her fingers numb. On the front, written in elegant, sharp black ink, were just 2 sentences. You passed. Do not speak of this. The words didn't make sense at first. You passed. She read it again. You passed. The blood drained from her face, leaving her cold and dizzy. The relief she had felt at the sight of the money evaporated, replaced by a horror so absolute it made her stomach turn. Passed? You only pass a test if someone is administering it. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. The wallet hadn't been lost. Kang Dae-hyun hadn't forgotten it in the booth while distracted by business. He had planted it. He had wedged it between the cushions intentionally, like setting a snare in the woods. He had sat in that booth, watching her with those cold, dissecting eyes, deciding if she was a suitable subject. And then he had left, leaving the bait behind to see what the mouse would do. Amara looked around the empty diner, panic rising in her throat. The windows, dark and reflective, suddenly felt like lenses. How long had he been watching? Had he been in the parking lot? Had he been listening on the other end of the line before she even dialed? You passed, she whispered to the empty room. It wasn't a reward for good citizenship. It was a recruitment bonus. She looked back at the money. A moment ago, it had looked like freedom. Now, sitting next to that note, it looked different. It looked like a down payment. She hadn't just returned a wallet, she had walked through a door she couldn't lock from the inside. She had proven she was honest, and in doing so, she had caught the attention of a man who dealt in secrets. Amara shoveled the money and the note back into the envelope with shaking hands, jamming it deep into her bag. She locked the diner door, her movements jerky and paranoid, checking the shadows of the parking lot 3 times before she dared to step out. The cash felt heavy against her hip, a burning weight. She walked to the bus stop, clutching her bag tight, the terrifying truth echoing in her mind with every step. She wasn't rich. She was owned. 4 months passed. The sharp, icy panic of that night in the diner had slowly dissolved into a dull, rhythmic anxiety that lived in the marrow of Amara's bones. The money was gone, converted into tuition credits, a stack of textbooks, and the first month of rent in a studio apartment that didn't smell like mildew. She had tried to convince herself that the transaction was over. She had done the job, passed the test, and the envelope was just severance pay for her peace of mind. But the silence of the university library at 10 p.m. felt heavy, reminiscent of the diner's empty booth. Amara sat in a secluded corner of the 3rd floor, burying herself in diagrams of the cardiovascular system. The library was a fortress of solitude, the air smelling of old paper and floor wax. She traced the path of the aorta with her highlighter, trying to drown out the world with anatomy. She didn't hear him approach. There were no footsteps, no rustle of fabric. She simply felt the air in the aisle change, a sudden drop in temperature, a displacement of space that made the hairs on her arms stand up. She looked up, her heart leaping into her throat. Kang Dae-hyun was standing at the end of the table. He wasn't wearing the suit from the diner. He wore a long, charcoal wool coat that made him look like a dark pillar against the rows of colorful books. His hands were in his pockets, and his face was unreadable, carved from cold marble. The tattoos on his neck were partially hidden by a scarf, but she knew they were there, writhing beneath the fabric. "Miss Collins," he said. His voice was exactly as she remembered it from the phone, low, resonant, and terrifyingly calm. Amara couldn't breathe. The highlighter slipped from her fingers and clattered onto the table, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the quiet stack. "You," she whispered. He pulled out a chair opposite her and sat. He didn't ask for permission. He moved with a fluid, predatory grace that made the library chair look like a throne. "You have been studying hard," he observed, his eyes flicking to the textbooks. "And you have been discreet. You told no one about the envelope. You spent the funds on debts and education. Practical. Are you stalking me?" Amara's voice trembled, a mix of fear and sudden, sparking anger. "I am protecting my investment," Kang corrected. He leaned forward slightly, the overhead light catching the sharp angle of his cheekbone. "You have been wondering why." It wasn't a question. Amara swallowed hard. "I returned your wallet. I did what you asked." "Why are you here?" "Because you returned it," Kang said softly. "Do you know how many people would have kept the cash?" 90%. Of the remaining 10, most would have handed it to the police, bringing unwanted attention to my affairs. But you. He paused, his dark eyes locking onto hers, dissecting her again. "You called me. You followed instructions. You were terrified, shaking in your shoes, but you did exactly what you said you would do." "I was honest," Amara said, the word feeling small and fragile in the air between them. "Honesty is cheap," Kang countered, his voice hardening. "People are honest when it is easy. You were honest when you were desperate. You held $4,000, enough to solve your immediate problems. And you gave it back to a man you feared." He placed a hand on the table. The tattoo on his knuckle, a black geometric spiderweb, flexed as he tapped the wood. "My world is filled with men who are loyal only to the highest bidder, Amara. They are wolves. Useful, but hungry. I do not need another wolf. I need a vault." Amara pressed her back against her chair, wishing she could phase through the wall behind her. "I don't want to be part of your world. I'm just a nursing student." "You were just a nursing student," Kang corrected. "Now, you are a candidate." "A candidate for what?" "For a position that requires absolute silence and steady hands," he said. The wallet was a field test. "I needed to find a civilian with a specific moral constitution. Someone who fears dishonor more than they fear poverty. That is a rare commodity. I saw it in your eyes that night in the diner." He reached into his coat pocket. Amara flinched, expecting a weapon, but he simply pulled out a sleek, black smartphone and slid it across the table. It stopped inches from her hand. I am not looking for a friend, Amara. I am looking to purchase your integrity exclusively. His gaze bored into her. I know your tuition is due again in September. I know your mother's medical bills are in collections. I am offering to erase it all. Your doctorate, your housing, your debts, paid in full. Amara looked at the phone, then back at him. And what do you get? You, Kong said. I get a doctor who belongs to me. Someone who can stitch a wound without asking how it happened. Someone who will never sell me out, because her conscience, that beautiful, rigid conscience of yours, won't let her. He stood up, the meeting over as abruptly as it began. Think about it. But do not take too long. The phone is encrypted. I will call you in 24 hours. He turned and walked away, disappearing into the labyrinth of bookshelves, leaving Amara alone with the black phone and the terrifying realization that her integrity hadn't saved her, it had just made her expensive. The black smartphone buzzed exactly 24 hours later. It sat on Amara's cheap laminate desk like a beetle waiting to scuttle. She stared at it for 3 rings, her heart doing a frantic drum solo against her ribs, before she picked it up. Come outside, the voice said. No hello. No identification. Just the command. Amara looked out her 3rd-floor window. The massive black GMC Yukon Denali was idling at the curb, a shark in a sea of rusted sedans. She grabbed her coat, her movements mechanical, and walked down the stairs. She told herself she was going to say no. She was going to hand the phone back, thank him for the offer, and go back to drowning in debt. It was the safe choice. But when the rear door clicked open and she slid onto the buttersoft leather, the smell of expensive cologne and ozone filled her lungs, and her resolve began to fracture. Kang Dae-hyun sat on the other side of the bench seat. The interior of the SUV was a sealed capsule of silence, insulated from the street noise outside. He held a thin file folder in his lap. Drive, he said to the partition. The car glided forward. I didn't say I wanted a ride, Amara said, clutching her bag. We need privacy, Kang replied, opening the folder. I have taken the liberty of auditing your life, Amara. It is a mathematical tragedy. He tapped a page. 60,000 in student loans. Another 12,000 in credit card debt, mostly used for medical co-pays for your mother's asthma treatments. You are 3 months behind on rent, and your caloric intake suggests you are skipping meals to pay for textbooks. Amara felt a flush of shame burn up her neck. My finances are personal. Your finances are a cage, Kang corrected, his voice devoid of pity. And I hold the key. He closed the folder and turned his body toward her, the leather seats creaking softly. The streetlights strobed across his face, illuminating the sharp angles of his jaw and the dark ink crawling up his neck. Here is the proposal, he said, his tone shifting from analytical to transactional. I will establish a blind trust in your name. It will cover your medical school tuition in full. It will provide a monthly stipend that exceeds a surgeon's salary. It will pay off your mother's medical debts and move her to a climate-controlled facility. You will never worry about money again. You will only worry about medicine. Amara's mouth went dry. He was offering her a miracle. He was offering her life back. And in exchange? In exchange, you become my asset, Kang said. I do not require a driver or a guard. I require a mechanic for the human body. My business incurs risks. Hospitals require police reports, I require silence. When I call, you answer. Whether it is a laceration at 2 a.m. or a bullet wound at noon, you will be ready. You will treat the patient, you will stabilize them, and you will forget you ever saw them. You want me to be a mob doctor, Amara whispered. I want you to be a trauma surgeon for a private clientele, he said smoothly. The title is irrelevant. The function is what matters. Amara looked out the tinted window. The city blurred by, a smear of light she couldn't afford to live in. And if I refuse? The air in the car seemed to drop 10 degrees. Kang didn't shout. He didn't move. He simply stopped blinking. He turned that cold, piercing stare on her, a look so heavy it felt like physical pressure on her chest. His eyes were dark voids, devoid of the warmth or hesitation that lived in normal people. In that look, Amara saw the violence he was capable of. She saw the bold black tattoos on his hand not as decoration, but as a warning label. Refusal implies you have leverage, Amara, he said softly. You have none. You have already seen my face. You have seen my associates. You have taken my money once, which means you are already in the ledger. He leaned in closer, invading her space. You can walk away, back to your debt and your hunger. But know this, I do not leave loose ends. I offer you a golden cage, Amara. Do not mistake it for a prison cell. It is the safest place you will ever be, as long as you are inside it. The threat hung in the air, elegant and lethal. He wasn't asking. He was informing her of her new reality. Amara looked at his hand resting on the leather seat, powerful, dangerous, waiting. She realized with a sinking feeling that the nursing student who worried about tuition was already gone. She was sitting in a hearse that was taking her to a new life. I have conditions, she said, her voice trembling but audible. Kang's tight jaw relaxed, just a fraction. I expected nothing less. Amara accepted the deal in the back of the SUV with a single, trembling nod, sealing her fate as effectively as a signature in blood. The transformation of her life was immediate and terrifyingly efficient. Within 48 hours, the crushing weight of her poverty evaporated. The student loans that had hung over her head like a guillotine were paid in full. Her mother's medical debt, years of accumulated misery, vanished from the collections ledger, replaced by a transfer to a private respiratory facility in Arizona. Amara moved from her drafty, mildew-scented studio into a high-rise apartment near the medical campus. It had floor-to-ceiling windows, polished concrete floors, and a silence so profound it made her ears ring. It was everything she had ever prayed for, and it felt exactly like a prison. The apartment didn't feel like a home. It felt like a holding cell for a high-value asset. Every time she unlocked the heavy steel door, she expected to find Kang sitting on her Italian leather sofa. He never was. In fact, after that night in the SUV, Kang Daehyun vanished. That was the worst part. The silence. The silent semester, she called it in her head. Her life became a study in high-functioning paranoia. She walked to class looking over her shoulder, scanning the faces of passers-by for the man with the neck tattoos or the stone-faced associate from the diner. She stopped talking to her few friends, terrified that a slip of the tongue would violate the absolute silence clause of her contract. She became a ghost haunting her own life, insulated by money but shivering with dread. The black encrypted smartphone Kang had given her became the center of her universe. It sat on her nightstand while she slept, a dark monolith watching her dreams. It sat next to her scalpel during dissection labs. It was the first thing she checked in the morning and the last thing she touched at night. She never turned it off. She never let the battery dip below 80%. She stopped studying to pass exams. She began studying to survive. Her previous academic ambition had been driven by a desire to heal, now, it was driven by fear. Kang had called her a mechanic, so she became one. She spent her nights in the university morgue, practicing sutures until her fingers bled. She devoured texts on ballistics, blunt force trauma, and emergency field surgery. She wasn't just learning anatomy, she was memorizing the geography of violence. She needed to be perfect. She knew, with a chilling certainty, that if she failed a test in school, she would get a B. If she failed a test for Kang, she, or her patient, would end up in a hole. Months dragged on. The leaves turned brown and fell, and the winter wind began to rattle the glass of her expensive windows. Still, the phone did not ring. The luxury of her new life began to feel like a psychological torture device. The stipend hit her account on the first of every month, a number so large it made her nauseous. It was a reminder that she was on the payroll. She was eating food bought with Mafia money. She was sleeping in a bed funded by extortion. Every comfort she enjoyed was a link in the chain that bound her to the man with the piercing stare. She would wake up at 3 a.m., heart hammering, convinced she heard the buzz of the phone. But the screen would be dark. She would lie there in the expensive sheets, staring at the ceiling, realizing that Kong was teaching her a lesson without saying a word. He was letting her get comfortable. He was letting her get used to the warmth, the safety, and the security. He was letting the golden handcuffs settle onto her wrists until she couldn't imagine taking them off. She belonged to him now. The silence wasn't an absence of danger, it was simply the deep breath before the scream. And as the semester drew to a close, Amara knew the breath was being held too long. The exhale was coming. It was 3:45 a.m. when the silence finally broke. The encrypted black smartphone on the nightstand didn't just ring. It vibrated against the wood with a violence that sounded like a drill. Amara was awake before her eyes opened, her heart slamming against her ribs in a frantic, terrifying rhythm. She snatched the phone, her fingers fumbling over the cold glass. The screen was a blinding white rectangle in the pitch-black room. No name. Just a pulsating green accept button. She slid her thumb across it. Hello? Downstairs. Now. The voice wasn't the smooth, baritone command of the library. It was jagged, breathless, and tight with adrenaline. It was Kang Dae-hyun, and he sounded like a man watching a catastrophe unfold. 30 seconds, Amara. Do not make me come get you. The line went dead. Amara didn't think, she reacted. The months of paranoia, of studying anatomy until her eyes burned, had rewired her nervous system. She threw off the duvet, grabbed the bag of scrubs she kept packed by the door, and sprinted into the hallway. She didn't bother with shoes. She jammed her feet into slip-on sneakers as she ran for the elevator. The lobby was empty, the doorman nowhere to be seen. Outside, the black Yukon was already waiting, its engine growling like a chained beast. The rear door swung open before she even reached the curb. Amara threw herself inside. The car accelerated instantly, pressing her into the leather seat. The city outside became a smear of neon streaks and rain-slicked asphalt. This wasn't a commute, it was an evacuation. They drove for 20 minutes in suffocating silence, the driver weaving through traffic with terrifying precision. They didn't head toward the warehouse district or the docks. They headed up. The SUV screeched to a halt in the underground garage of one of the city's most exclusive residential spires. Penthouse, the driver barked, pointing to a private elevator. Amara ran. The elevator ride was a nauseating ascent that made her ears pop. When the doors slid open, she wasn't greeted by a foyer. She was hit by the smell, the sharp, metallic tang of iron and rubbing alcohol. The penthouse was a sprawling expanse of glass and marble, overlooking the sleeping city, but the furniture had been shoved violently against the walls. In the center of the room, under a portable surgical light that cast a harsh, blinding glare, lay a table. And on the table lay a man. "Get over here." The shout came from the shadows. Amara froze. Kang Dae-hyun stepped into the light. He was unrecognizable. The charcoal coat was gone. His tailored suit jacket was discarded on the floor. He was wearing a white dress shirt, but the crisp fabric was soaked through with dark, blooming crimson. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing the full extent of the tattoos on his arms, which were now smeared with fresh blood. His face was pale, his hair disheveled. The cold, piercing stare that usually froze her blood was gone, replaced by a raw, frantic intensity. His jaw was tight, the muscles bunching as he gritted his teeth, holding a wad of gauze against the man's chest with trembling force. "He's losing pressure," Kang snarled, his voice cracking. "I can't stop the bleed." Amara looked at the patient. It was an older man, gray-haired, unconscious. His skin was the color of ash. A dark, ugly wound tore through his chest cavity, a gunshot, jagged and deep. The fear that had been strangling Amara since the phone rang suddenly vanished, replaced by a cold, crystalline focus. This was the moment. The debt was due. She dropped her bag and stepped forward, her hands raising automatically. "Move," she said. Kong looked at her, his eyes wild. "If he dies. If you don't move your hands, he dies right now," Amara cut him off, her voice startlingly loud in the cavernous room. "Step back, Mr. Kong. I need space." For a split second, the Mafia boss hesitated. He looked at the dying man, then at Amara. The desperation in his eyes was naked and terrifying. He was no longer the predator, he was just a man begging for a miracle. Slowly, he pulled his hands away. Blood welled up instantly, dark and fast. "Gloves," Amara commanded, not looking at him. She snapped on a pair from the nearby cart, her heart slowing down as her training took over. She looked at the wound, then at Kong. "I'm going in. Don't let him move." She reached into the chest of the dying man, and the silent semester was over. The surgery had begun. Amara didn't feel the cold marble beneath her feet or the oppressive weight of the penthouse luxury anymore. Her world had shrunk to the 10-inch square of torn flesh and the rhythmic, failing beat of the heart beneath her fingers. "Retractor," she barked, holding her hand out without looking up. For a second, there was no movement. Then, the heavy, cold steel of the instrument slapped into her palm. Kong Dae-hyun, the man who commanded armies of enforcers, was obeying her. "Pull back." Gently, she ordered, guiding his trembling hand. "If you tear the vessel further, he bleeds out in 30 seconds. Hold it steady." Kong froze, his muscles locking into place with the unnatural stillness of a statue. Amara dove in. Her hands, usually shaky with caffeine and anxiety, were rock steady. This was mechanics. This was plumbing with a soul. She clamped the bleeder, the metal clicking shut with a sound that echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. She siphoned the pooling blood, her eyes scanning the anatomy for the source of the catastrophe. "There," she whispered. "A jagged nick in the intercostal artery. Suture. 4-0 proline." Kong handed it to her. His breathing was ragged, harsh in the quiet room, but his hands, those lethal, tattooed hands, were surprisingly gentle as he assisted. For the next hour, they moved in a grim, synchronized dance. The barrier between boss and employee, between predator and prey, dissolved. There was only the surgeon and the assistant, united by the desperate necessity of keeping death at bay. Amara worked with a ferocity she didn't know she possessed. She stitched the artery, cleaned the cavity, and checked for collateral damage. Every knot she tied was a defiance of the fate that had brought them here. She wasn't just fixing a body, she was securing her own survival. "Pressure is stabilizing," she announced, watching the rise and fall of the patient's chest deepen. "He's coming back." She placed the final stitch, cut the thread, and stepped back. The silence that rushed back into the room was heavy, but it wasn't the silence of a tomb. It was the silence of a church after a prayer had been answered. Amara peeled off her blood-slicked gloves and dropped them onto the metal tray. The sound was final. She took a deep, shuddering breath, the adrenaline finally draining away to leave her knees weak. "He will live," she said, her voice sounding raspy, like she had been screaming for hours. "But he needs antibiotics. And rest. If you move him before 48 hours, the sutures will tear." Kong didn't speak immediately. He was staring down at the older man's chest, watching the steady rhythm of breathing. Slowly, he lifted his gaze to Amara. He looked ruined. His white shirt was destroyed, stiff with drying blood. His hair was plastered to his forehead with sweat. But as he straightened up, the terrifying composure of the Mafia boss returned, slotting into place like armor. He grabbed a towel and wiped his hands, the motion deliberate and slow. He walked around the table until he was standing directly in front of her. The smell of copper and expensive cologne was suffocating. "I told you I required a mechanic," Kong said, his voice low, the velvet rumble returning. "I was wrong." He looked at her hands, bare now, stained faintly pink. And then up into her eyes. For the first time since she had met him, the darkness in his gaze receded, replaced by a glint of something that terrified her more than his anger. Respect. He dipped his head. It was a single, sharp nod. An acknowledgement of equals. You are an artist, Amara. He turned and walked toward the window, pulling a fresh pack of cigarettes from his pocket, his silhouette framed against the city lights below. Amara stood alone by the operating table. She looked down at her hands. They were trembling again, but not from fear. She felt a strange, cold power humming in her veins. She had walked into the lion's den and commanded the lion. She had held life and death in her palms and forced them to obey her will. She looked at the sleeping patient, then at the man smoking by the window. The nursing student who worried about tuition and exams was gone, left behind in the back of a speeding black SUV. Amara Collins was no longer a waitress. She was something essential. Something dangerous. She was the doctor. And the surgery had only just begun. Amara has officially traded her freedom for a golden cage, but the real danger, and the romance, is just beginning. Would you have taken the deal with the devil? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one comment here, so please drop your comments. Also, smash that subscribe button and hit that notification bell so you never miss another incredible story.